So today, in this session, we're going to talk about what you need to do to be effective and successful in what CA referred to as the application economy. You've heard about that a lot so far, and I'm not going to repeat a definition right now, but I'm very, very pleased today to have a huge panel where we make up for in quality. We actually have two very, very relevant speakers here. Otto, who almost needs no introduction here, and then Tony Locke of Freeform Dynamics, who were behind a major research study that we did around the certain traits and behaviors that we've identified in those who really have been able to capture the essence of being a true digital business. So, without further ado, because we've only got a 30-minute session, today we're going to talk about specific aspects. 5 we picked out. We actually, within the research, identified 10, but for the purposes of time, we've picked the very best of the best 5. And the first trait that we've identified, we'll come in a sec, but first, I actually was going to skip things and give Tony now and give Otto a rest because he's presented enough recently, and give Tony his moment of glory here, just to talk a little bit about the research survey that he masterminded on behalf of CA.
I wouldn't like to say I masterminded it. It was a team effort.
That's British modesty, by the way.
It's not. It's the truth. We basically arranged a very large study of organizations worldwide, pretty big companies, folks like yourself. We asked 1,400 plus people their opinions on digital transformation, API, DevOps, etc. It was quite a complex study, so almost by definition we had a degree of skew in there with people who are very much into the areas that we talked about. But it was 16 countries, half a dozen in Europe, 4 or 5 over in the Far East, a couple in North America, South America. We covered the globe pretty thoroughly there. And we had also a number of conversations with senior executives, just one-on-one on the telephone for half an hour to add more color to the survey results themselves to get the sort of picture. And from this, we created something that we called a digital transformation index, where we basically took their answers in relation to a number of indicators on how well the business was doing, and on a number of other KPIs relevant to their organizations to just basically work out differences between those who are doing a lot of good stuff and the people that were just beginning on their digital transformation journeys. And you'll see some of the differences coming up in the slides that follow.
Great. Thank you, Tony. So the first one isn't possibly a huge surprise, but I think what we really like to do is delve down a little bit deeper into this, into some of the data behind this. And what we're going to do with each of the 5 traits that we've identified is for Tony to specifically zoom in on some of the data, and then for Otto to interpret that and kind of flesh it out and give it some color. So, Tony, the first one.
Yeah, the first chart here is, as I said, we broke down the respondents into 3 distinct groups based on these answers to their current business status and how much they'd actually moved along. And we had the digital disruptors are the people that are really far advanced down their transformation processes. The digital achievers were the people that were just behind them in terms of how effective they'd been so far, how much effort they'd put into it and how much they saw things changing. And the mainstream, which was much more representative, everybody that's either just starting or not yet really on the journey. And as you can see from the results that we have here, just in terms of the appreciation of how important software and application development are to them today, the numbers are very, very different between those 3 groups, with the digital disruptors already agreeing very strongly that they have to become much more application-centric, much more of a software-driven business. And on the right-hand side, you can see that many of them do truly regard themselves to be not software companies, but in addition to whatever it is that they're doing. And we covered 10 different industry verticals, from people that produce real things through to banks and finance that are just really dealing with numbers and data. But everybody there, you can see very, very high percentages, 80+%, saying that they are a software business in addition to whatever their core business is, whereas at the mainstream you're down at a third of that number.
Great, thank you, Tony. And Otto, how do you make sense of this data, and what experiences have you come across in terms of your role?
I think the right hand, in addition to our core business, we are now a software company question, I think is highly indicative of the time that's required to achieve that kind of competency, and also having the right kind of vision to achieve that goal, that has to be a goal that is agreed to as a company at a very high level. There has to be complete buy-in that, in fact, software is a core part of the business. It has to be something that isn't just an add-on. It's not just a competency that's a nice to have, but it's a fundamentally different way of thinking about what the business is and how the business operates.
So it becomes part of the organizational DNA, so to speak.
It's really a DNA change.
Right.
It's also the fact that software is now actually recognized for the first time almost in and of its own right, instead of just being something that's hidden in the IT system. And that's a very big difference, that recognition of software rather than just using it and ignoring it.
Great, good, wonderful. So that's our first point. The second trait is maybe a little bit more kind of esoteric, is a high emphasis on emerging digital channels to the customer. And we'll just pick out here, there's 4 particular digital channels that we surveyed and highlighted. And I think, Tony, you first, for me it's mobile and social that are leaping out. Would you agree?
Yeah, mobile and social are very obviously different here. You've got different factors of, almost 3 to 1 again between the digital disruptors and the mainstream. And that's obviously indicative of the fact that, to a degree, and it sounds weird in the current context, they're much more mature than either wearable technologies or the Internet of Things. So people have got more experience of them and much more recognition of them.
Great. And Otto, I mean, I can see you wearing an Apple Watch here, so we can cover wearables, but were you surprised by this data?
I was not. The fact that mobile is in the #1 spot, I think that's indicative of the current state of affairs. Thinking about my previous role in media, and the fact is that a predominant portion of media is now consumed on mobile devices. That's just an absolute fact of life. Staying on that same page, the way that media is shared and communicated is, massively driven through social networks, and that's today's reality. Wearables certainly have a lot of potential. I'm not sure that I'm going to be watching an episode of Game of Thrones on my watch anytime soon, but there are absolutely use cases there that are going to be interesting and compelling. Internet of Things, I think, is the most nascent of these, and I think the data absolutely reflects that.
I think the Internet of Things one is particularly interesting because, again, it is so new. There's been a lot of talk about Internet of Things over the last few years, but usually it's been a context of, well, what do we actually mean by that? And what was coming through here is something that shows that the people that have really had the time to think about it and put the effort into it really do think that it's something that's going to make a big difference to them going forwards. Indeed, you can see more than half of those digital disruptors already think IoT is going to be critical to them. Not just important, but critical. And that is something that means that they've got some time. They've actually thought about, well, what is IoT? It covers a multitude of different definitions, but it's clear that it's not just a market.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things, Internet of Things, if anyone was here in one of the earlier sessions, we actually had a partner just saying, if a vendor comes to you and says, we have the whole Internet of Things platform, we do everything related to IoT, they're either lying or they don't understand it. Yep. He was very kind and actually said they probably just don't understand it, but I couldn't agree more. I mean, what's your view on that, Otto?
That's absolutely true. It is such a complex taxonomy, and there are so many use cases that there isn't a singular platform. There isn't a crisp, compact, well-defined set of use cases that anyone could address. It spans all the way from oil rigs and jet engines, down to the smallest consumable consumer devices. And much to, I think it was Paul who made the point today that some of these technology domains, these emerging technology domains, are frankly too large, too varied, and too complex for any one company to really address at scale in their full entirety. I think Internet of Things absolutely falls into that category.
But it is interesting, there's one or two elements in the Internet of Things that really have been around for a long time. We have had remote monitoring on oil rigs, etc., or in power stations, but it's been very basic. But now that's really going up and up as you can actually monitor and record far more. The question is, what's the important stuff you need to get immediately, and what things can you maybe batch up and look at occasionally?
And I'll add just one more piece to the Internet of Things theme. You're absolutely right. It's been around for a while, and the basics have been there, at least in certain portions of industries, basic monitoring of oil rigs, absolutely. But what's coming into play now is the use of data analytics to really do more than just monitor what's going on with a particular piece of equipment or set of equipment. It's to really deeply understand what's going on in terms of patterns, in terms of events and potential future events that go far beyond simple monitoring of equipment.
I'd agree. I think also related to that, when you look at Internet of Things, I think one of the reasons why it's still kind of finding its way and being defined, you look at, for example, legal issues in terms of healthcare. So you're monitoring, wearables. If it's the doctor's tracking that if you're meant to be moving around just after an operation, that you should be mobile every day. Well, who captures that data? Does it go to the doctor? Does it go to the healthcare provider? Is that data aggregated and surfaced up and then anonymized and so forth? And if I was training to be a lawyer today, I specialize in Internet of Things because I can see a lot of class actions and so forth coming up. There's a whole minefield. I mean, wonderful opportunities, and I just wondered if, Tony and Otto, you had a view on that.
Data governance is absolutely, a complex and frankly not yet solved aspect of Internet of Things, and actually much of other data that's generated, sometimes even without consumers knowing that it's being generated and consumed in the background. And we're just scratching the surface on some of the legal and frankly social issues that are part of.
Data governance is going to be a real biggie. You can tell by my accent that I'm not a local. I actually live in Germany. And the idea of who can access your data, to who does it belong? In Denmark, your health data actually belongs to you as the patient, not even the doctor. In many other countries, it's very different. So this whole idea of the governance of data is going to grow and grow and grow in importance, absolutely, with respect to all of these and everything else that we already have in the infrastructure.
Great, excellent, thank you guys. So next question, kind of trade is, the middle one is focus on modern software development and delivery methods. Obviously we have the Agile Transformation Zone and the DevOps areas there. In terms of the data, let's just highlight some of that first of all, and over to you, Tony.
Yeah, we actually asked complete subsections on APIs and DevOps in particular, and you can find all of those results later. These are just a couple of the interesting results from there, but there are many others. But you can see, do you already have agile development technologies in place? Those digital disruptors, again, more than twice as likely to do so than the mainstream. How widely they're using those agile solutions, the same way how prevalent are the DevOps solutions that are being used inside the organization. That's still variable between people, but the importance of them, the fact that they are again being used in enterprises. Everybody in this survey were serious enterprises, as I said, in 9 or 10 verticals. It's not just small companies doing stuff. These are all very big companies. It's real in there, it's happening.
And Otto, do you feel that DevOps, for example, has now become mainstream? Do you think it's now accepted, at least we should be doing it to some degree?
Everyone's talking about it. Executing it well is a whole different matter.
Yeah.
What I find fascinating with this slide is the correlation between agile development techniques and DevOps. These two things are highly correlated for a reason, because when you implement agile, you tend also to implement a DevOps methodology that aligns very closely with that transformation. One of the core attributes and value of moving to Agile is to break down barriers between functional portions of your organization. In this case, breaking down the barriers between development and operationalizing the code that you develop, and to really treat that as a continuum rather than as discrete activities. So I really see these things as being 100% in unison.
Excellent. I completely agree. This is where it becomes something that you've piloted and you expand the use and you scale over time. Then it just becomes something that we just do every day. It just becomes second nature. Would you agree, Tony?
Yeah, the research also showed that the breaking down of the barriers that Otto mentioned is absolutely happening more inside these organizations that we've defined as the digital disruptors than everybody else. Whether that integration was being led by people from dev or ops varied over different companies, but it's very much the case there. But getting that process right on how to do this stuff at scale rather than just for a singular project, but to take it more broadly inside the organization, that again needs process and technologies on top of just the sheer development technologies to actually make sure that this stuff works effectively and efficiently. That came through from the research very much.
Great, excellent. So we have two more, and this is a subject close to my heart, coming from the SOA and middleware space, and working with SOA almost kind of 10 years ago or so. And the fascinating thing now is that kind of integration and connectivity, as you alluded to in your presentation earlier on today, Otto. These integration points are now becoming super important. They've never gone away, but I think they're ultra important now. And this key trait really focuses on the managed use of APIs to engage the developer ecosystem. And I'll just pop up the data there. Over to you, Tony, for your interpretation.
Yeah, again, this is showing that there is a recognition that external people have a role to play inside very, very many organizations. The traditional enterprises that have always tried to do everything internally are now much more accepting of both accessing information from the outside and using external resources to try and help them in certain scenarios. So it's very clear from this that the developer ecosystem is no longer the people just inside the organization, but a much broader community.
Thank you. And Otto, in terms of the importance of APIs just to speed development, and that, as you were alluding to earlier today, do you maybe expand on that?
Absolutely. The fact is that you can't build an application today that meets consumer expectations as a complete siloed activity. For example, people expect for many applications to have Twitter integration, to have Facebook integration, to have integration with other social media services and communication services. It's just a basic expectation that consumers rightfully have, because all the other applications that they use in that kind of category of applications have those kinds of features and functionality. So to the first point, yes, you absolutely can't do it by yourself, and you have to have the competency and the skills to take advantage of other people's APIs to bring the functionality that customers expect into your own user experience and application. The second point is also critical. Again, you can't do it all by yourself anymore. It's about building ecosystems. It's about building engagement by connecting to partners and building a broader ecosystem than what you could possibly build as a standalone entity.
I couldn't agree more. I'm just interestingly.
I was going to say, the really important point here from my point of view, and I was a Fortran coder way back in the mists of time, decades and decades and decades.
I don't think there's a Twitter interface for that. But
you'll get people getting nostalgic.
I think there is actually, but the important point here is that very first word on the graph, and that's the managed use of APIs, not just throwing it open to the world, but making sure who's using it, what they've got access to, securing it properly. That's the really important element.
It's that whole life cycle, from you can create as many as you like, but what happens, for example, you have a sports event related API that lasts for the duration of that, say the Olympics or the Soccer World Cup. Well, after that, do you still want to keep those APIs open and so forth? No, you want to close those down and make sure those are sunsetted, and it's having that discipline and governance.
It means you need to have essentially a catalog of these microservices that you're creating so that you can understand which ones do you need to end of life, which ones do you need to keep. Do you need to restrict the access to them during certain times? When you're opening them up for external developers, do they get different access to the people that would actually be using the app itself? How do you manage that? It's the management that's the really important element, not the API itself.
And let me put an exclamation point on that important point, which is that when you open up APIs for external consumption, you had better be in the business of managing those APIs, because other developers and other applications are going to depend on the APIs that you're providing and the maintenance of those APIs in order to function well. So you break your API, you break that contract with the developer ecosystem you're trying to build, you're breaking other people's applications, not just your own.
Or if your APIs are going out to third parties, you might be able to get that information from a number of different third parties. But do they all provide the same information? So are your developers actually working to some sort of standard, like which API should we use? How does that work in terms of response time, accuracy of information delivered, where there are alternative APIs out there to pull in similar information? Which ones should we be exploiting? Particularly if there's a charge element involved, a license element.
Right.
No, very true. So we're just coming to our last trait, which is kind of goes to the the hub or heart of the topic, which is use of digital to drive core business efficiency and effectiveness. And our survey says?
Our survey says yes. As you unsurprisingly, I suspect by now, would expect that the digital initiatives are both important for external customers, but also for the internal use to help our staff work more efficiently. Everybody out here, I guess, has had to work integrating different applications together, probably on a point-to-point basis in the past. That's great when you're just doing one or two. Well, actually, it's not great when you're doing just one or two. It's a pain in the neck. But making the effort so that we can exploit these internal resources more efficiently is something that I suspect nearly all of your organizations are trying to do to help us create new work streams, to help us work just in a better fashion, to become more streamlined. We need to do that, and the results from the survey very clearly highlight that it's good internally and externally.
Great. Otto, your view on this?
This is a really interesting one because it's almost like you're creating a virtuous cycle when you're moving toward the digital disruptor end of the spectrum. In other words, your ability to become more efficient and drive efficiency out of your existing operations means that you can reallocate those savings and reinvest it into your digital disruption pipeline, and it becomes a self-reinforcing mechanism. And I can say that with some degree of confidence because that's exactly what I did in previous roles when the task was to build something new, but there wasn't, frankly, a full budget to be able to do that new thing from scratch. So it became a process of finding new efficiencies to be able to fund development that was going to add more value to the business.
Great. And Tony, I can see you have some little notes which you've been dying to share.
I've got some numbers here that were also thrown up from the research, and if you look at the reports, you'll be able to find them. But to get on to Otto's point here, we found that the digital disruptors, the amount of budget that they currently had allocated to digital was something like 36% of their current IT budgets. The mainstream guys, it was down at 23%. But when we asked them, what do you expect it to look like in 3 years' time? For the digital disruptors, it was up to nearly half of their budget. It was at 48%. And even the mainstream were up to 36%, more than a third of their budget. What was clear is that people are going to be spending more and more of their IT budgets on these elements that are directly related to digital disruption. And equally, the results showed that the guys that are in these digital disruptor camps were actually making more money, more revenue, both from new work streams, but also from their existing business. Their KPIs were really very, very positive in business terms that they could show to the board. The investments were paying off, as was mentioned by Otto on the main tent this morning.
I think, Otto, you were talking about the 12-to-1 ROI, wasn't it? Or something for every dollar, there's 11 or 12 dollars back.
An astonishing figure, really.
Yes.
Yeah.
We should be using that more in customer meetings, obviously, but I'm just going to kind of zoom in on actually the workforce efficiency and effectiveness, where if you take, for example, a very low margin industry such as retail, where sometimes it's just a couple of %, if you can squeeze that extra mile of efficiency out of that and then reinvest it in new digital programs and initiatives, that really can help put you ahead of the competition, surely. Yeah.
I was going to say, 1% may not sound like a big advantage, but if 1% of your company's total revenue runs into tens of millions or hundreds of millions of dollars, that's a lot of money. Wall Street might not think much of 1%, but $100 million you can't argue with.
Well, actually, that 1% figure was used in the panel this morning. Ashley mentioned 1% and in the context of oil production.
Yeah,
and it was a huge figure. So 1% can actually really move the needle depending on how you look at it.
There's that theory of marginal gains, that even just squeezing that little bit of a difference can ultimately knock-on effect cumulatively have a massive impact.
Well, that's the other thing. The chart shows that these aren't one-off investments, that in 3 years' time, people are going to be investing more again. And so it is going to be increment after increment after increment. It's not an overnight revolution.
No, I completely agree. We have a little bit of time. We do have a mic, if it's okay, if anyone has any particular questions for the panel, if that's possible. Anyone would like to ask a question to Otto or Tony? We have a couple of minutes left. Don't be shy, anyone.
No.
No? Sure. Okay.
We can break into a song and dance if you like, but then you'd be really scared.
I'd leave now. I've seen it before, by the way. No. But I just say thanks very much indeed, both to Otto and Tony, and thanks very much, everyone, for coming to the session.
Thank you.
Thank you.